Okay. So take a look at some of the feature of a eukaryote now. So eukaryotes, unlike prokaryote, depending on who you are, in the case of eukaryote, it can be either unicellular or multicellular. So the majority of that eukaryote that we know of, or we are at least familiar with, are of course the multicellular eukaryotes, but in terms of kinds and the number-wise, the unicellular single-celled eukaryotes are far greater than all those multicellular eukaryotes, because there are some specific groups of the eukaryotes, mostly single-celled. The best example of such a single-celled eukaryote is, guess what? Amoeba. Amoeba is eukaryotes. As in other words, it has nucleus as well as the organelles, but still they're very simple, relatively speaking, as compared with like humans and other animals. But they are still, nonetheless, eukaryote. So unicellular or multicellular. Any other example of eukaryotic, single-cellular eukaryote that you happen to know? Can anyone think of any example? Very good example of a single-celled eukaryote. Maybe this is a Friday weekend. Friday, maybe kind of can remind you that some of you might love, especially on Friday, every Friday, have like some help from this single-celled eukaryotes activity. Thanks to these guys, you can east. Not west east, but east. Sorry. This is another very good example of a single-celled eukaryote. Although the members of the same group or other these members of the same group are multicellular, like mushrooms and molds, but yeasts are another very I shouldn't say notorious, very famous example of a single-celled eukaryotes. But anyway, that's not important. But the important thing about this multicellular eukaryotes, one thing is this so-called multicellular, the so-called multicellularity, okay, being multicellular, can only be possible in eukaryotes. Prokaryotes, there is no such thing like a multicellular prokaryotes. Okay. Only some of the eukaryotes somehow were able to achieve this status of a multicellular organism. But then once you accomplish this multicellularity, so to speak, then you create something else, some other headache. Something called hierarchical organization, from lower tier to higher tier, the like stepwise hierarchical, that's why stepwise organization, higher level, lower level, lower level, lower level, the lowest level of organization. Being a multicellular organism somehow created this another such additional feature, which is what? Give me an example of such a hierarchical organization. Well, this is it: tissue, organs, and organ system. These three different levels of organization system are only found in multicellular organisms. Why? Because it's all something like the multiples of cells get together and represents as such And as a result, you have something like tissues, organs, and organ systems. What are they? So here is the starting point of any, whether it's a eukaryote or prokaryote, the starting point of this living, the cell, organization, cell, and molecule. Inside of a cell, there are the organic macromolecule, you know that. But once you have cell, if you happen to be a multicellular eukaryotes, now somehow it's an automatically you organize a certain area into some distinct group of different tissue. What's the definition of tissue? You know what tissues are. But can you define this? Everyone has tissues, right? Here and there. So you know what kind of vaguely know that what tissues are. But what are they? Tissue. And what's organ? And what's organ system? What's organism? Let's just... So the tissues are group of similar cells. Mostly same cells, but occasionally different kind of cell can also join. So we cannot absolutely say tissues by definition is a group of the same cells, but kind of similar. The same cell. Same cells got together. Why? To do what? So group of same cell or same or similar cells gathered together, organized together to carry out same function. Same function. So it is a functional organization. It's a functional unit. So different tissues will definitely have a different role, different function. So we do have all different tissues, each of which will carry out different function. And each tissues made of their own unique kind of almost the same tissues. Okay? So that's the definition of tissue. Then what's organ? So tissues is the lower level of such organization, and the higher level of organization, different tissues get together, then can form on higher such unit called now organ. We all know what the examples of organ here, all different organs we can name and think the different example of organs. And what's organs? So since you can easily think of examples of organs, then can you define organs? What are they? Now, they are not the same type of tissue anymore. Other than that, the same basic definition also rules over here. So, different type of tissues now, definitely here. In case of organs, different tissues organize themselves together to do what? Once again, same function. So, if you think of brain, some specific type of different nerve cells are there in brain tissues. Okay? But then once you form one organ like brain, then this brain do what? Some specific function, right? Your heart, okay, your liver, your stomach, your eyes, all different such organs, each of which is made of all different type of tissues, but they are different, but the common thing is they are working together for same function. That's the definition of organs. So that's why you cannot find any such example of whatever tissues, organs in unicellular organism. Because unicellular organism is just one single cell. Tissue. At least in order to build tissue, you have to have some multiple cells together. And not to mention even organs. It will take much more number of different cells together, forming different tissues first. And then after that, you form some specific organs. That's why. Now, the top of such organization level, top hierarchy is this organ system. What's organ system? If you are kind of interested in what kind of different organ system we have as a human, the best place you can easily find out is what? You go to general hospital. If you go to general hospital, then each different department, okay? Each different department is actually the way they have this department in the general hospital is by this different organ system. So you have a heart problem, then you are advised to go to the circulatory system, which is one such example of your organ system in human. Okay. If you have some mental problem, then you are advised to go to the nervous system. Okay. So that's example of such organ system. So in other words, organ system, one single organ system, different organs are working together. But now here the catch is, under organ system, all different organs within a single organ system do not play the same function. No, not anymore. Each organ may still perform a different function, but still they can be grouped into one such organ system. Why? Because they are working together toward a same direction, same goal. Even though each of different organ in a single one organ system may not play identical function. If you think about it, for example, circulatory system, what kind of different organs are involved in the circulatory system? One is the heart, and another one is the blood vessels, and inside of blood, some different type of blood cells, tissues. But each of different, they have, overall they may have one single goal of a function, but each different organs have a slightly different way of working function. That's what makes this organ system. So these three levels of hierarchical organization can you find in all different multicellular eukaryotes, especially in animals. But same thing can you find in the plants, although slightly they may have a slightly different way of organization as with animal, but basically same, this tissue organ system also they are conserved. And all of this, starting from cells, so many different cells. How many different cells do we have here in our human? Several billions, at least. Several billions, several trillions of different cells, okay, make one human being, okay. But one thing is, that's just the magic, isn't it? Because let's say we do have several trillions of cells, okay, in a single adult human. But if we think of the origin, where did they come from? Originally, from a single cell. All these trillions of cells are actually nothing but the direct descendant of the starting point is a single fertilized egg. Sperm and egg got together, fused together, and fertilization occurred. And what happened? From then, this fertilized egg, the cell, divided like crazy. So they just kept dividing. So they created this whole thing. They simply created what? The clone. Exactly the same copy. Just like I mentioned last week. Single cell divided into two, and each of these two cells divided into another two, so multiply. But by doing so, what they did is simply exactly copying their genetic material and then passed on to and creating a new larger number of cells, and that's how. So starting from one cell, human, fertilized one cell, sperm and egg got together, and ultimately this one cell became trillions, whole different trillions of clones. Then, logically speaking, if these all descendants, now we have cells, are the exact same copy, the clones, then try to think of the case of the identical twin. Identical twins are, in terms of individual basis, at the organism level, they are also clone, aren't they? So that's the reason why they look identical, exactly the same, because their genetic makeup is identical. If that is the case, all our cells, what do you think? All trillions of cells existing in our body, do you think their genetic makeup are identical or different? What do you think? Give me the answer. What do you think? All these cells, genetically, are they identical or different? Basically, identical. They are clones. They simply kept dividing, copying. And so that is nothing but literally, they are also the clones. So then we have some puzzles. If they are the clones, then why aren't they identical outside? If you look at different tissues, they are different. They look different. Why do they look different? Why do different tissues look different? Because they carry out different functions. And speaking of organs, all different organs don't look identical at all. Why? Why they look different? Because they are involved in different function. So that doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense. How all these genetically identical cells now all of a sudden look so different and they play different functions. That's the puzzle. What's going on here? How do they do that? And anyway, that's the concept of what? Now is the time. That's the concept of what? Differentiation. Yes. So, different tissues, different cells and different tissues, different organs become different. Why? Why do they become different? To carry out different function is what we call differentiation. So in other words, it's very important. Multicellular organisms have to go through. It's not an option. Hey, it's a kind of a luxury. Should I go into the differentiation or not? I kind of reluctant. No. There is no choice. You have to. All this, once you decide to become a multicellular organism, and then you have no freedom, but simply you have to go through automatically to this route of differentiation. Otherwise, what if I don't? Hey, maybe some of the cells, just like me, I always try to disobey on anything. So I don't want to. Hey, I don't want to go through this differentiation. Then you become what? Instead of a multicellular organism, you become, guess what? If you do not follow the rule of differentiation, then you become cancer. And what's cancer? Cancer is this kind of an object of elimination. Has to be removed because there's a cancerous. Like whenever you don't like an undesirable like creature or individual, we label them as a cancerous individual that we need to get rid of in our system. And exactly, that's cancer. Why? Because it doesn't obey the rule of differentiation. As a member of this multicellular organism, you have to follow the rule of differentiation. Otherwise, you will interfere the well-being of other members of one individual. That's the rule set up so strictly as a multicellular organism. Why? Cancer doesn't care about. Cancer decide to, it's not a problem. It's not a fault of cancer actually, because cancer, what happened is in cancer cell, the mutation occurred, so they can no longer follow this specific set program of differentiation. That's why it become undifferentiated cells, like keep multiplying, and then they don't worry about like behaving as a like civilized individual, like other differentiated cell. Differentiated cells behave themselves. They try not to inflict any the damage to other area. But cancer, unlike, because they are undifferentiated cells, they are very selfish. They only think for themselves. They just simply keep dividing themselves, and that is the reason why cancer is so the critically dangerous to the entire well-being of an individual. But anyway, okay. So that's the difference between differentiated cells. Differentiated cell will establish different tissue, organ, and organ systems, so to speak, normally. Normal. I hate this word normal, but anyway, for this occasion, I will use this normal, or maybe average. But this cancer cell is something kind of abnormal, so that they do not follow this programmed differentiation, but simply as an undifferentiated cell. In other words, cancer cells are simply identical. In a lump of cancer cell, they are all identical, like appearance, and then just simply keep dividing. So the point is not the cancer cell, but the multicellular organisms, they fate as they have to follow this route of differentiation. But the bigger issue is, what makes this differentiation? It's kind of the exciting puzzle, because there must be something behind this, because all genetically identical, but how can you do these all different things? If you have all totally identical same gene inherited from your father or mother, okay, then still you can become different. Well, let me give you, so for those who are kind of impatient, so let me just very simplistic, straightforward answer for this. How they do that is, let's say, okay, you inherited 100 different genes, okay? But instead of using 100 genes altogether, then there is no room for like being different. But instead of doing so, you only get to use a very small portion. Let's say out of 100 potential genes, you only get to use 10 of 100 genes. Now you have a freedom, because different tissue, depending on who you are, you decide to use such different 10 out of 100 genes. So like if you are brain tissue, then out of 100 genes, you only use your own unique selection of 10 genes, and the rest of the 90 genes, you make them silenced. Okay? You don't use them. If you are like the skin tissues, instead of using that exact same 10 genes that brain tissue use, I'm going to use another different 10 genes and leaving 90 other genes like unused. Then you will become unique. You are nothing but what your genes play. You have to accept this. Your gene will rule. Your gene dictates what you are. And if so, if you use such different combination of genes, then that's how you can become different. And that's the actually very simplified version of the answer to the mechanism of the differentiation using different sets of genes. Okay, that's you have potentially so many genes, like 100, or actually you have 25 or even 30,000 different genes, but you only get to, depending on who you are, like different tissues or different organs use such different portion of genes, then that's how you can become different from the rest. It's kind of does that make sense? Or still, what is it talking about? I don't know. I tried my best, but I don't know. It's just it's a matter of my ability as well as your willingness to accept new idea if that happens to be a totally new idea. Well, we'll get to later. If you are kind of unfamiliar with what different, yeah, as we move along, hopefully, I'm sure, hopefully, not hopefully, but I'm sure you will be able to absorb more of this concept so that you will become more comfortable about this. Okay. So anyway, that's differentiation. But now, so that's up until to the level of individual, what we call as an organism, it's one individual organism. But what's beyond? What's beyond the level of this one individual? Then there goes higher level of organization. So it just go beyond the individual level of organization. In that, there is such group we call the population. Here we are talking about, we deal with the one identical human population. Okay. Population by definition, group of the individual belonging to the same species. So that's what we call the population. So always it's just a terminology of a local thing. So in this room 109 at the science building at Sookmyung University, in particular place, location, we happen to have one small human population every Friday, 5 p.m. to whatever. Okay. That's what we talk about, this population. Population. In biology, of course. Yeah. So it's a group of same species, group of individuals that belong to the single, same identical species is population. But in reality, everywhere where you try to find, actually in reality, it is impossible to have only one single population in one specific place. Now we pretend that we are the only existence. The human population is the only existence in this room, but is it true? No, it is not. Look at all these different bacteria and floating around. So that is not a single human population. So in reality, any given area, what we deal with is, instead of a population, which is identical, homogeneous, single species, but it's a mixture of different populations that we call community. So this is more realistic. scenario in a given area. And obviously, this is still we are looking at the hierarchical organization. So this community is one notch above the level of this population because several different populations get together to form a one community. Just like several different tissues get together to form one organ. That's why we call that as a hierarchical organization. Okay. Now, this community is strictly very, very local thing. And within this local area, now, if you want to include some of the environmental factors influencing the activity of this community, then now we talk about the higher level of organization, including the external environment, is now what? Ecosystem. Okay. So in ecosystem, in addition to this community, you also include some of the environment, like climate, and some of the food and water source in that particular local area. Okay, then that makes ecosystem. And all different ecosystems combined all together in the territory that we know of is called the biosphere on Earth. Okay, entire Earth's ecosystem is now biosphere. Okay, but that's not an issue. For like if you are only concerned of preparing yourself well for the exam, you will never get to see like any questions like asking any something like specific characteristics of what's community and what's ecosystem, because that's a very stupid question. Anyway, who cares? If you forgot about the what's ecosystem, then look it up. What's the point? If you forgot about the tissue, which one is a higher tissue or organ? Yeah, that can happen. Look it up. So but simply to understand there are some different levels of organization. Now here's the more important things is this. Because of this hierarchical organization in life, now we deal another headache called emergent property. What is this emergent property? Emergent is something emerging, a property, characteristic that somehow happen to pop up is emergent property. Emergent, here we are not talking about the emergency or anything, not that emergent. Emergent, arising, some popping up property is what we call an emergent property. Definition is really confusing. Actual emergent properties definition, if you look up on the dictionary, it is something like it is written like the whole is greater than some of its components. What? This guy doesn't even know what the algebra was, arithmetics. How can the addition of a component can be bigger than the whole sum? But anyway, that's what it is. So the strict definition of this emergent property is the whole is greater than some of its components. By the way, didn't I give you this in your lecture handout, the first chapter? Yeah, it's there. Lecture handout, it's all written. But anyway, the more realistic explanation of what emergent property is this. At each different level of organization, if you go up, like when you are at the level of a tissue, now you deal with some specific characteristics when you are tissue level. Now different tissues organized into organ. if you arithmetically think about it, simply organ is nothing but in the sum of tissues. So once you mastered the whole characteristic of tissues, then theoretically you shouldn't have any problem of understanding the organs. Because after all, organ is simply, this particular organ is only made up of the tissues that I have already studied. All different characteristics of studies, I am so familiar with the tissues. So if these tissues have formed some specific unique organ, so be it. I don't care because I know you already, because I have studied. No, that doesn't apply to in this case. All of a sudden, new unexpected characteristics or property pop up when they establish organ. Where did they come from? Yes. That's what we call an emergent property. And so, like the level of cells, usually, as a biologist, it's a common mistake. You study so hard the internal component of the cell. Yeah. Because that's easier, much easier, and that's the actually textbook way of studying science. Traditionally, it has been. If you want to know something, then you start studying its component. Like if you want to learn how the mechanism of this the wristwatch, how it works, then you disassemble all component of the wristwatch and then study each component, the mechanics, functions, and then you put all these learned ideas and the information together, then now suddenly you can understand or how it works, and that's how you understand the mechanisms of the watch, wristwatch works. And that has been the traditionally very efficient way of studying any complex, very complex organization. So, in the case of a cell, no exception. Yeah, you want to study the cell's function, then why don't you study each component inside of the cell? All different biochemical and genetic and all these different things. And then you have done it. You have done your homework. So you become more confident. Okay, now I know this cell. I am expert in this cell. And then suddenly a task was given to you. Hey, there is a tissue. And this tissue is made up of only this type of cell that you are expert in. So can you explain us that how this tissue works? Sure, no problem. Because I am already expert in the tissue and these cells. Then you try to tackle this thing and then, oh, there is something that I've never thought about this. Where did it come from? This tissue is only made of these cells that I know so much about it. But this tissue doesn't behave as I know. That's emergent property. And tissue level, organ system level, always you are encountered with this new characteristic, new property. That's why it is called emergent property. Okay. That's what I try to explain in this sentence. Probably better example is this. Think of a brain. What's brain as an organ? It's nothing but something that made of nervous tissues. So you know so much about how this neuron, that's what it calls a nervous tissue cell, how the neurons works, and they are simply nothing but the whole complex, whole piled up version of these nervous tissues. But no matter how much, how thoroughly you understand, study the function of a single neuron, nervous cell, there is no way you can understand, because once these whole neurons, established as an organization, as a brain, then suddenly something like emotion. What's emotion? Intelligence, emotion, anger, happiness, all come from brain. But can you understand all those mechanisms of how you have this happiness, how you have this anger, or feeling of love, or any the concept of intelligence simply by studying all different nervous tissue connections? No way. Maybe later, if you actually study right way of all these connections all together later in the future, then you may be able to actually understand it. So, but not at this moment. And at this moment, people lazily blame this incapability as, hey, it's because of emergent property of life. Life has this emergent property. Deal with it. So you cannot understand everything. There is some mysterious thing always pop up. That's life. But like I said, that's very lazy excuse. That is not. Actually, emergent property is not something very unique only in biology, life. No. That emergent property, you can also find similar emergent property like in engineering too. Bicycle, for example. Let's say all different parts of bicycles are all scattered together in the floor, garage floor. And some person who doesn't know anything about the mechanics walk in the garage and look at piece of all these parts of a bicycle, then they don't understand, of course, what are these. But any engineer who is knowledgeable engineer who is able to assemble these parts, different parts of a bicycle, then he or she can easily put these all different parts together, and then voila, this is a working bicycle that you can enjoy the riding. It's a miracle to this poor soul. And emergent property, wow. See? We are at the level of such infancy. It's not something that emergent property, whatever, that is something impossible for us to understand because of this, the level of organization, but it is because of our stupidity. We do not understand yet enough about the complexity, is what we call it an emergent property. So I dare to say it is simply some illusion. What happened? Like I said, so-called this reductionist approach of studying has been the traditional and very efficient way of studying science. Reductionist. You study the component first, each different parts. Like I say in the example, if you want to know the function, how a cell works, then you study first each different component inside of the cell, and then all together, then you try to understand. Because if you simply understand to begin with the whole thing, it is impossible because the cell itself is very complex. So why don't you take the simpler approach of understanding one by one each component, and then later all together, now I understand. And that has been very, very, very efficient way of understanding very complex things, like this mechanical function of this watch, and to some extent the overall function of a single cell, likewise. Okay. But not anymore. As this whole level of study move along, advanced, then they just encounter this whole brick wall. They cannot penetrate now. Why? Because this whole life is much, much, much more than, in terms of complexity, much, much more than what we thought we would or we could handle in this way. So up until now, we may be able to, like luckily, we may be able to solve all these different problems using this so-called reductionistic approach. Okay, but if you do the same thing to understand whole mechanism of a complex, the eukaryotic multicellular organism works, it fails. They failed every time, miserably failed. So now, this cannot go any further, because this, if you look up, if you type in to search for this, the emergent property in Google, then you may be able to see this pull out this particular figure. Try to explain what it is, emergent property is. Look, this whole, okay, all different pieces put together, you can create, assemble either this shape, or that shape. Potential is there. But what type of actual final outcome would be made, it is impossible for you to predict by simply studying this component. There's no way, right? Maybe artificial intelligence may be able to. But poor human brain cannot predict what type of a particular final version can be made out of this whole dumping pieces of each individual component. That's exactly what's going on in life. Each different component make up some of different function in terms of so-called hierarchical organization, and largely you cannot predict the behavior like this. But does that mean it is impossible? No, it's not. It's simply that we are helpless. Our power is so limited. It's only thing that we have to acknowledge. So that's the reason why the whole new terminology in these days is so-called the systems biology. Before, it was not like this. The name of this department 10 years ago was like a department of life science or anything. Like something like 5 or 6 years ago, they have actually made this move. Department or division of systems biology. Maybe they are doing the exactly same thing, but simply title has been changed to cope with the moving trend toward the future. Yes, this is the future of the life science, systems biology. No longer can you individually, componentally study and then expect that you are able to understand the whole things. But if you want to actually really correctly understand the whole thing, then you have to consider everything. Like put all things together and try to consider all possible outcome, algorithms, all different algorithms is put together. So now, obviously then individually, human basis, you cannot perform this task alone. You need the help of whole computing power. That's what it takes. The computer should help, because all different outcome in terms of you have to calculate different component. There is one possibility scenario that each component A and component B will interact inside of a cell. Then the outcome B is as such. But what if this component A interact with C, but then later it also have another interaction with component F or anything? So you have to consider all these different possibilities, which like your brain will be blown away. But computing power, with the help of computing power, probably you will be able to. And that's what's the approach, or what it takes in the systems biology. So whether you like it or not, almost everywhere, you have to invite now the involvement of this the so-called artificial intelligence in everywhere. Like That's yeah, we have created this situation, but we cannot avoid or we cannot go back to what it was before. Is what we are facing with. So, in summary, this emergent property is something that is not real, but something due to the limitation of our approach of studying, so-called reductionism. It has some limitation in terms of its approach. That's what we actually observe this life's complexity as an emergent property. So actually what the real emergent property is simply the life's complexity, which cannot be explained by reductionistic approach. So then what do we do about it? Now, new approach. How about system biology approach? Trying to look at whole thing together, like at a single event with all different algorithmic possibilities with the help of computing is system biology. But anyway, the bottom line is, even though there is still, like I said, it's a long way to go, and it's very difficult to understand thoroughly about the life's complexity and mysteries, but still now is the best time, as our textbook put it nicely. Why? The technological advances is so mind-boggling and amazing in these days. So many tasks that we cannot even think about it now these days as possible. So it's very good blooming time for us to understand things. Okay, I'm not sure whether I can finish this thing or not, but this is the essence part of the first chapter's lecture, as I personally believe. But anyway, let's put it as an introduction to this, the main theme. Let's bring up this obvious characteristics of all life, which is diversity. Yeah, everybody is different. So we can say life is so diverse. Diversity is one distinct characteristics of life. And how do we know? How do we recognize this life diversity? Usually in the form of this different species. We as a human, one single species, but we also know that there are so many other different species out there living together with us. And each different species represent different kind. So they are so diverse. Yeah, of course, within a single species, we never fail to recognize each different diversity, but still, more distinct difference in terms of diversity can you also find outside of the single species. Like if you look at and try to think of how many different kinds of species are there. Yeah? Then who made these different species? Then we just point finger to evolution. You did it. So these different species are actually result of this so-called the act of evolution, process of evolution over long period of time. Okay, so we have to have enough time. That's one premise. But anyway, it's a result of evolution. Process of evolution created something called speciation. Remember last week's single twin split into, identical twins splitting into, but over a long period of time, like 50,000 years or anything. Now, these two identical twins, there may be a certain time that these two identical twins can no longer be considered as something very similar or equal. Why? Because of this mutation change in their genetics, so they look intrinsically, they become so different. That's actually basically what I was trying to explain, was the concept of such evolution, starting from single oneness, and then gradually the descendant of one single individual gradually change over time. Like, you can apply this concept to the case of human and chimpanzee. There was some, like, a long time ago, common ancestor was there between chimpanzee and human, but somehow mutation can occur differently in different individual, so it will make this individual different, and their differences become widened. Okay, then all of a sudden, at a certain time overlap, then these two individuals can no longer be part of a single same member. That's speciation. So even this different old butterflies and mosses. So species from distinct populations that evolve separately ever after, resulting in new species. So this becoming more and more different, the end result is emergence of two distinct species over time. So yeah, currently we estimate, no, not estimate, but the human identified there are about approximately 1.8 million different species. Okay. But actual real number estimation is about 10 times as many as that they actually identify the species, which means, yeah, species diversity, so many different species out there. So theoretically speaking, long time ago, in the beginning, the number of different species must have been much fewer than nowadays. Okay. But also, some variation to this scheme is that the number of different species that does not exist, like maintained stably, but is so dynamic. So at the same time, it is being created, but also a lot of a portion of the existing species extinct from existence. So the number of different species nowadays can make some kind of balance. But anyway, but here is the point. There are so much different species that each of which can represent this life diversity. But even that, in spite of being different, but strikingly, if you examine each different, like, hey, there are 1.8 million different species we have identified so far. So let's take this example of 1.8 million different species. Then are there any? Yes, they are so different, but still, are there any some common things, common characteristic? Would there be? And the answer is yes. Even if they are so different like this, but there are some undeniable common characteristics also exist at the same time. Why? How come so different they are, but at the same time they are also kind of share some sameness? Is very famous phrase of biology, unity and diversity of life, is kind of characteristic things. Life at the same time features the diversity as well as the unity. Like the flip side of a coin, like a coin has two different sides, faces, and life also has like common characteristic as well unity aspect as well as diversity aspect. What is the meaning of this? All life that you get to observe then also display this same feature of unity and diversity that indicates that this evolution and common ancestor is a concept. Why they are so different? Because they went through evolution. But still why they are so common? Because that means originally they started from a single same thing we call as a common ancestor. So this is a very simplified version of such evolutionary tree starting from the very first common ancestor we call as a Luca for some reason. Luca is the first common ancestor of all existing living organism here. Luca stands for, actually. Why Luca? Last universal common ancestor. So you are going backward. Going backward, then it will be the last common ancestor. From the aspect of a human, what would be the first common ancestor for us? The common ancestor between human and chimpanzee will be our first common ancestor, which we shared in the most recent history. But what's the last common ancestor? If we go further and further to the past, in the very beginning, that the first thing from which everybody else got split. Okay, that is the first, from the starting point, it should be called as a first common ancestor, but for that logic, it is called the last universal general common ancestor. That's what the scientists believe, how the process of evolution has occurred. Okay. Starting from Luca, it became different and different over time. Okay. It's a shame that I cannot. So this is also another very simple but more scientifically correct version of such evolutionary tree. Starting from this Luca. So always, if you are interested in, you can trace and follow at the bottom of this the branching points, then to indicate which one is which one is occupying as a common ancestral position. That's it. No, I cannot. So I'm sorry, but actually my intention was to go over. Actually, this is the most important, personally believing, most important aspect of speaking of these common characteristics. There are certain agreeable 7 different characteristics, common characteristics of life. That the figure is in your lecture handout at the very last page. So that's what I had intended to go over today's lecture, but unfortunately, I don't have enough time. So maybe I have to wait until next week. So next week, I will start with this species concept to continue on this diversity aspect, and still with these differences, why still we have some of the certain common features, and more importantly, what does that mean? Why do we have still such common characteristics? Is what we are going to take a look at next week. Okay, so today I have to make this class dismissed, and so did all of you have the scrap paper? Then if you want to, then put your name and then write down if you have any question or nice drawing before you leave. Then, okay, sure. So have a nice weekend.